What is the best study material for us on our spiritual path? When we're looking for answers, what's the best stuff to use? And is there a real answer? There's a lot of material out there. This video is just going to be me talking about my experiences. I've spent a lot of money on, not just books, but DVDs, a lot of electronic programs in the past, as I'm seeking way early on, and there's a lot of it that I realized was incredibly important to me, even though I have no interest in it any further. There is other stuff I purchased along the way, thinking it might be helpful, and it was a waste. It was not a good thing. But there's a process that we go through as we're seeking that I think becomes very normal. We can actually see it in a Buddhist story that I will talk about a little bit later. But right now the question is, we're looking for answers. There's a lot of stuff out there. What do we grab and why? We get a lot of advice, and I've taken a lot of advice, and I'm ready to provide my own insights that are a lot more streamlined than all the advice we get along the way. There's something simple to look at right here that I think is going to help us decide what is best for us individually. There is no one right answer. A lot of it depends on what you are interested in and what you're looking for. My name is Dan Paulson, and welcome to the video. I've got to say that in the beginning, well, first of all, let me show you over the years, the diversity of my material. Let's go ahead and take a look at the things that I have, just some of the things that I have bought that have been important to me. These are in no particular order. They're just things I've collected over the years, as I've said, that were important to me at times. You know, the Teaching Company, this is some old material here. What do we have? Science and Religion, The Spiritual Brain, The New Testament, Greatest Controversies of Christian History, Confucius, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad, Great World Religions, Islam, The Meaning of Life, Biology and Human Behavior, Mystical Traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Comparative Religions, Lost Christianities, Buddhism, Understanding the Brain. And all of these courses are being taught by very renowned professors and in their field. There's a fair amount of Dr. Bart Ehrman material in there as well. And again, these are things that I went after voraciously, but it's at a point in time in my development where I am not where I am here today. I can assure you what I'm doing at this point is understanding that there's something out there. I don't know what. There's one reality that I've figured out at this point in time. There's a bottom line reality to something, and I don't know what it is. But you can see early on, I am blending mind and spirit. I'm looking for a connection there that is... I'm living life going, I have spiritual experiences, and I don't believe in anything supernatural. Something is natural here. What is it? So that's how I felt all along. So I'm approaching all of these religious teachings as if there's a fair amount of truth to them, but that there's something in there kind of hidden. I don't know what. Okay, so anyway, the story goes on, and at the end of the day, I can look at all of that material and say, I don't listen to it anymore. I could give it away to somebody. I don't even want to listen to it anymore. At the time I listened to it, I was very voracious about it. Let's go ahead and do that Buddha story. Do you know that the story of the Buddha is a monomyth? When the Buddha starts out in life, he's the son he's the prince of a land that is going to become his. His father tries to protect him and keep him from seeing the world as it is. He gets married, has a child, but he learns enough about the world to realize he doesn't want that life. He wants to do something different. He wants a spiritual life. This represents us right here living our first life where we are attaching to the world. Him getting married and being hidden away is akin to first sin in the Bible. It's being held in a different way. I am the Buddha. You are the Buddha. Whoever is on this path that is going, I am at wit's end, I'm ready to make a change, becomes the Buddha. We all have a Buddha nature. That is what Buddha told us. Okay, so what happens though so that represents our life when we first attach to things. Then time goes by. Now we've seen enough of the world to understand we don't like it and we want to make changes. So we leave that behind Like we're leaving Pharaoh behind, or we're leaving the island of the old gods behind, or whatever myth has. And in Buddha, it's the same thing. He's leaving his old life behind and is moving on to a spiritual life. And the first thing he does is start learning from people. And he learns voraciously. He becomes the best student. He applies himself. He learns everything that they teach. And pretty soon he is as advanced as the teacher and is asking questions that the teacher cannot answer. And he says, okay, thank you. And he moves on to something different. And the same thing happens. You jump in, you become a good student, you learn it, you do what you're supposed to diligently, you get to a point where you are as good as they are at it, but you have more questions. They don't, but you do. You have something else going on. You want to know more. And at some point, even they're telling you, you have to have faith. You can't do this. It's just something mysterious. You just have to let that go. And that's a point where the seeker is going to be like, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. That sounds like supernatural right there. And maybe I can't understand because it's going to be too complicated, but there's no possible way I'm going to sit here in my mind and say, oh, I'm not even going to look then because I probably can't. I'm going to look. If I fail, it's not going to be because I didn't try. Okay, so I'm going to try. And what you hear when you're talking to people like that, despite the mastery and their robes and whatever else, it's like, yeah, you don't have my answer. They are leaders of others. Do you need a leader? The seeker doesn't. You're the one that's going to go inward. Most humans do need the leaders, so they're going to be big and popular, and that's what we go chase. So we look for that until we find out that there's something unique for us. What I want to do is cover a couple of things in this video, but first of all is let's talk about the process of interpretation. This is something that I've done before, but it's important in this right here. At this point, it shows where they are in the interpretation and how we have advanced through levels of interpretation that describes exactly why we start out listening to them, learning from them, and then outgrow them and then find something different. There's an exact reason why that is. If you've seen this before, I apologize for the repetitive nature of it, but I'm going to make up a verse. An anchored ship cannot sail. Now let's break straight into verse interpretation. What I have done is as the verse creator, I have nested a teaching in there. And the teaching is this, that as long as I am holding on to something in life that I can't let go of, whether I like it or don't, I can't be free of it. Whatever I am mentally clinging on to is going to go with me for life. However, when I tell the general population, they go, yeah, I'm not passing that around. Plus, they need some guidance. So you create a story, you create a way for that to travel in a way that sounds different. So you use analogs, and instead of having it be about your inner self, you create something in the outer world that fits with that structure. And a ship anchored, we know is not going to move around something. So that becomes an analogous representation of the idea that the ship is me, and what it is anchored to represents what I'm holding on to, and I can't escape it. So that becomes the lesson right there, nested in a very special way. However, if a person doesn't interpret that, and that's how I build it, who carries it? What do they get out of it? They're going to get something different. Somebody that doesn't believe that, that shame and that stuff and that anger and that hatred that I'm holding inside, I'm not going to deal with that stuff ever. They won't pass the lesson along unless you package it in something that they will happily deliver. Myth and religion becomes that delivery system. And in this case, this is how it's doing it through multiple layers of potential mental comprehension. First of all is a non-interpreted layer. It makes enough sense, an anchored ship cannot sail, for somebody to not interpret that verse and say, yeah, duh, thanks for letting me know. That's telling me to put the anchor out. Okay, I got it. It would be something like that. Something as benign as that, and it would make sense to somebody. Another person might come along, though, and begin to realize that it is a metaphoric representation of the self. However, in this layer right here, it is going to be completely interpreted about the physical world and the physical life experience. It's not going to be turned inward to the part of our memory, to our inner being. It's going to be used to just look at our current life. And here, when this happens, this is where we see variations come into with religions, because people can interpret this in that physical way in a way that makes sense to them. They're not using a fixed or a consistent process with each other. So in this case, a person could say, an anchored ship, oh, that represents, that I'm the ship. Yeah, I've made that connection. Okay. And my anchor, what I'm holding on to a bad relationship, a dead-end job, something somehow, habits, somehow that if I don't let go of, I can't move on. And you know what? That makes perfect sense. I'd leave that there as an interpretation, wouldn't you? However, somebody that thinks it through or somebody that has a different experience might think, wow, and being anchored actually is a very secure feeling. Throughout my life as an orphan, I never had a secure place. I didn't know if I was going to have Christmas somewhere, and it was always somewhere different. I didn't know any of that stuff, and having an anchor feels very good. It's a safe place, port. And you go, damn. Well, that sounds good too. But they're completely different. In one case, there's a clear idea that you need to let go in order to sail free, and the other idea says you got to hang on to stay secure. What we're doing here is we're interpreting at the physical level, and we're coming up with interpretations that make sense, but they're not consistent with each other. In this case, they're benign. It's a fun one to play with. It's a fun verse to play with. But you can see that at that level, there is variation in interpretation. If we turn this into a spiritual verse or a religious verse, I could say something, let's just do that. I will say, an anchored ship cannot sail, saith the Lord. All right, it sounds like I'm taking extreme liberties here, but all I'm doing is showing a process. This is how it works. A verse, like a religious verse, if it was in there, this is how I'm going to treat it. I can go through all of Jesus' teachings and treat them exactly the same way as I am with this verse about the anchored ship right here. In fact, that's exactly what needs to be done. Okay, so what we're seeing at that layer 2, and now saith the Lord, we've got believers in it that believe that it is true. So now we've got something there that is known. We know it's an encoded message that has a story on there, and the story is meant to carry in the population. And the population goes, oh, I believe the carrying case. They do. They've grabbed onto the analogs. The analogs were cleverly written enough that they become real to the person. So that can happen at that layer. And that's what happens with religion, that becomes a real layer to them. That would be a theist. An atheist would be a person who flat out argues against that as being viable at all, that layer 2 is not at all true. Those two exist right there, really in concert with each other on the same teeter-totter, both sides of the same coin, the theist and the atheist that fight consistently about whether it's true or not. They're pretty much the carriers of the material. None of them understand that there's something in there. But there's a third layer right there, and that is where all of these philosophers and the teachers and whatnot reside, where they've taught about, well, the religions themselves and what they mean, how they were founded upon. In Dr. Bart Ehrman's case, it's looking at things and realizing that there is too many questions about what we've been told about the viability of this for it to be true. But it's very much not being interpreted in any case. What I'm going to suggest is that the stories were made at their time containing this template, and that is what is actually in there. The parts of the story that sound like they may or may not be true, those are just parts of the story that were made at their time. The archaeological things, you want to have a story about destroying a city, you take a local city. Jericho was just destroyed. Use that in the story. So there you have it later. People go, look, there's archaeological proof. There are a lot easier reasons to explain that story than suddenly saying there's proof of supernatural magic that used to happen that doesn't anymore right there. Yeah, there's a point where when I'm watching that material anymore, I realize, there's something different in there. It's not true. I mean, that's the supernatural claim. The atheist that, against it, that to me, the philosopher like Bart Ehrman are kind of like the atheists that actually have evidence. They don't just say, no, it's a bunch of baloney. It can't be true. Prove it to me. They're showing, well, because of this and because of that and because of these comparisons, and this doesn't line up and that doesn't line up and this sounds like that over. Suddenly you're getting a big, clear picture as to why it's not true, but still is lost is that it's on a sequential template that is teaching something. So at some point when I'm listening to other channels and listening to what they have and they're going on about that layer 2 again, I'm like, yeah, I don't even care about that. I see what's going on here. You guys are arguing about the carrying case. I'm kind of finished with that. I now see that's what it is. I went through everybody's school of thought going, teach me, show me, what about this? What about that? Then you move on to the next one. At some point, at some point you find something that is common. And that's the difference. And you're not telling people, here is what you believe. It suddenly shifts from, here is how you find your salvation by turning it over to some sort of, either a deity or some other sort of a magical entity, to they're actually teaching you how to take charge of the way you feel in life and how your life experiences are right here in this template. That is what is really there. But when it comes to material that I like to read, I don't read anybody else's interpretation anymore because I realize unless they're doing what I'm doing, that it doesn't ring with me. The idea that it's true or not true or how this could happen or that or something, it's like, nope, those are analogous terms. Don't treat them as real. Shift them to the psyche. They mean something. It's an interactive step. When you do that, and you're listening to other people who are still all over the place with these nebulous ideas, you're like, all right, quantum physics, let's go. Yeah, there's something, you're ready to move on. You're ready to move on. But okay, now, that having been said, what are you interested in? Some people are like, man, I want to know as much as I can. I want to have all that material. I'd love to do that. My job was such one time that I spent many hours getting up to mountainous, remote locations to my work site. I'm by myself. I'm listening to these. That's why they're CDs. That was my work vehicle at the time. I could play CDs in there. So, yeah, I did this for hours, listening to that stuff, going through it. And that was fun. It was fascinating. I wouldn't do it again. But boy, was it important for me at a time in my development. But I also found this template in this pattern. I never picked it up from anybody. Now that I have found it, I think it's hard to find it. I think it's complicated. It's easy to explain it, and there's probably people that could say, wow, yeah, I don't need to go through all that stuff, Dan. I don't have time to go through all that material. But I know what you're talking about on that. I've seen that pattern before. I see what you're talking about. I see how to turn it inward. So I think in that case, you don't need a lot of material and you don't need other people's interpretation. What you need is the actual source material and learn how to interpret it in your own psyche. Learn how to make it yours. When you name something, when you judge something, when you have a thought, that you're creating that at that time, knowing that that's all across the board what they're teaching. Finding ways of turning that mysterious sounding verbiage into something that's very interactive in the mind. Listening to other people's interpretation for me becomes tough. People ask me if I read so-and-so here or there or something like that. And at some point you're like, no, I don't. And I don't want to. They're not doing it's like they don't get it. I can't listen to them. But I also realize if I don't have this comprehension right here, I don't get that. I'm still going along going, yeah, the person still has something I don't understand. When you understand that person's limitations and you see where they are and you see that they can't go any further, you're done with them. Yeah. That's the story of the Buddha. Then what did he do? He went on his own. That's what we're doing. We're going through everybody we can. We're learning through it and then going on our own. But you can go through at the level you want to. Some of the material is fun to listen to. I love it if you have the opportunity. Yeah. I mean, if you like it. At some point, I have gone through it and gone through it and gone through it to where it's like, okay, I got to a different place. I see where I am and I see to let all of that go. I worked my way through all of that material to understand what it had, the similarities, the differences. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk about was dreams in the stories. And I want to say, I don't think that there's anything mysterious about dreams in spiritual stories. I think that they are simply a storytelling vehicle that allows the potential for outlandish things, things that people won't question. Oh, it was a dream. You can, yeah, if you're trying to tell a story, you're making up a story, but you want it to sound realistic, but you want to throw some fanciful things in there. The easiest way to do it is to, Jacob's ladder, one of my favorites. There's steps. He puts his head down on a rock, something unchanging on the ground. But as he dreams, he sees a ladder with going up, steps, with angels ascending up and down to heaven, which represents not only to me the story, how it works, that there's steps of the sequence of Genesis as you're going along from healing to healing to healing story, a calling to a calling to a calling. And we'll have to interpret far enough to see that actually in place. But that it's more than that, it represents the human healing process. We take care of something and you go, oh my God, I feel better. And then time goes by and you're like, God, man, I got something else that's bugging me. I got to take care of that too. And you do that and you feel better. And then time goes by and you're like, oh, there's something else, that actually, if you're on the path, that actually happens. And that ladder, that ascension, that idea is nested right in there in the dream. If the person was walking along and saw that, you might question that and think it's, I don't know. It's just it's an artistic way of making the story. I don't think in dreams they are doing anything that is going to be different than the rest of the sequence on the template, that it's not going to go someplace different. It's going to stay here. What's going to happen is the analogs are going to become some very far-fetched, wild, what's going on kind of a thing. You get to Daniel or something like that, or somewhere where there's this incredible imagery that I haven't even really looked at. You're like, I don't know what those analogs mean. There's a sequence. There's something going on. You have to spend time with it and study it. I realize that the more I get into Genesis, the more I'm understanding what they have going on by spending a lot of time with it. And if I was all over the place, I can see the big picture now. It's time to focus on Genesis on one thing, but I can move somewhere else to Daniel or to the New Testament and start reading, and the sequence is still there, but the analogs are so different. I go, damn, I'm not quite sure what that says. You have to spend time with it before you go, okay, I got it figured out. It's a process like that's how I find it works. Anyway, yeah, dreams. I don't think there's anything mystical in dreams when they come up. I think that they're going to be just these incredibly intense ways of creating incredible imagery. Violent, almost impacting, something that can be, very much there. Or fairly benign. It doesn't have to be very much. Yeah, the Jacob's Ladder one, that's not a big deal, is it? But I think it's just a technique. It continues to vary the story while containing the same elements. Those steps are there. Abram moved by stages to the Negeb, to the desert, to the fertile place that is devoid of things. That's our inner being, our empty selves, moved by stages to that spot. Jacob's Ladder. Those are the sequences that are in there you can see that there's steps, there's sequences, there's something happening to a higher place. The Negeb, heaven, both representing a higher place. Those are the similarities we look for. They don't sound similar at first. Conceptually, we have to see them that way. Anyway, okay. I wanted to say that. The material, it's a tough one. People have asked me, again, about other authors, and I'm like, boy, at this point, I don't know what to tell you. You're kind of on your own. There is so much out there. And I have gotten away from that because I realized they're like all at that layer 2. Layer 1, layer 2. They haven't turned it inward. Once you do that and you realize all that layer number 1 and layer 2 is a carrying case. None of it matters. It's made up to carry the sequence. The sequence is all you want. Listening to the other ones talk about the viability of that layer or why this or that, it's like, that's fine, but that's not what's there. So I lost interest eventually in other people because I haven't found anyone doing this yet. Anyway, yeah, it's pretty rare. All right. Well, I wanted to say that. I hope that helps. I don't know that there's any magic to the dreams. I don't think so. Although I can also say that there are many things that I don't have interpreted. I see sequences, I see patterns and go, I'm not sure. I don't know what they've got going on. I'm so far removed from it. I don't get it. But I see sequences. I just don't know what they mean. Patterns. And yeah, bizarre. How fun is that? Anyway, all right. That's it for this video. Love one another. See you in the next one.